Welcome back as we take a look at the Sermon on the Mount. And our last time together, I mentioned that there were four great questions that all philosophies and religions tried to answer, and we looked at the first two. The first of those first two was, what is real? And the answer is that God and his kingdom are what are real. And the second question is, who is well off? And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus answers that with the Beatitudes. This series of people. It's not exhaustive, it's not everybody, but it's pointing to the people who we look around in our world and we wouldn't want to be those people. I mean, just take people who hunger and thirst after righteousness. And you would think, oh, that's really great. I want to be a person that hungers and thirsts after righteousness. That's not what Jesus is getting after. When Jesus says, blessed are the people who hunger and thirst after righteousness, he's thinking about people whose children have been abused, who have lost someone to the hands of an oppressor or a murderer. Those are the people who are hungering and thirsting after righteousness. It's people who look around the world and go, this thing that happened, either to me or someone I love or to those people, that was wrong. It's people who are suffering. And the reason Jesus can talk this way is because his answer to that question is that anyone who willfully inhabits the present availability of the kingdom is blessed. That's everyone. So what are the third and fourth questions that Jesus is getting after in the Sermon on the Mount? The third question is, who is a good person? Like, what makes a person a good person? And the fourth question is, how do I become a good person? Now, this is really important to know, because if you look at the history of biblical interpretation, you have some people who would say that the Sermon on the Mount simply exists to demonstrate to us how far we are from the heart of God. I mean, there were folks like Martin Luther even, who said that the Sermon on the Mount exists to demonstrate how lost we are. Well, if that's the case, then why did Jesus say, or why would Jesus say at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, like we talked about last time, that you can actually do this, that you can actually enact what he teaches? The Sermon on the Mount, better understood, exists to show us how unlimited we are. That there are things that you don't want to do that are within your power once you are inside of God's kingdom. We don't always want to forgive, but inside of God's kingdom, we are empowered to. We want to judge, but inside of God's kingdom, there are mechanisms for us to not be judgmental people. We always wonder, what is the right thing to pray for? The Sermon on the Mount tells us these are the core things. You can always pray for these things, and God is available. You can have a conversational relationship with God. So what are the answers to those questions? Well, who is a good person? A good person, as you will see over the teachings of Jesus, is anyone who loves the Lord their God with all their heart, soul, mind, and spirit. That is actually what a good person is. Is anyone a perfect person? Do we do that all of the time the way that we wish we would? No, I don't know anyone who's ever done that. But that's the path of becoming a good person. And that fourth question, how do I become a good person? Well, I become a good person by becoming a disciple of Jesus. And this is crucial for us because it has been so lost in so many Christian communities that you actually can become a disciple of Jesus, an apprentice, a student of Jesus. And so the task, as you read through the Sermon on the Mount, as you listen to the Beatitudes, is to say, this is how someone actually becomes a student of Jesus. Here's one for you. Jesus says that no one can serve two masters. You will hate one or love the other, be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Well, the only way for me to become a disciple of Jesus, just in that one example, is when it's clear to me that I've got a choice to serve God or wealth, to just try serving God this time and seeing what will happen. So let's say there's an opportunity where there's a need that's been presented to you and you have the resources to participate in it, but you don't want to because you'd rather have those funds, those resources go to something else. In this one instance, choose to do what you think God is leading you to over what you want, and then just track it. It's very much like every student, that there's just homework to do. And there's trial and error, and you just keep going after it and going after it until you become a student. So Jesus also says in the Sermon on the Mount to not judge. So what would happen if you just decided that you weren't going to judge? That you didn't have all the information, because none of us ever do. That you were going to be open to people giving you an honest assessment of their lived experience and not judge. And Jesus gives this little example. He says, you're looking for the speck in your brother's eye while there's a log in your own eye. And everybody thinks, oh yeah, like you shouldn't judge because you have your own stuff to deal with. You've got your own log. And that's true, but even more so and more deeply than that is, do you know what happens when you have a log in your eye? It's not that you have your own stuff to deal with, but your own log distorts your own vision so much that you can't possibly judge. So what would happen if you committed yourself just over a period of time, 6 weeks, 6 months, 12 months, that every time you felt like you were going to judge somebody, whether it's someone on the opposite side of the political aisle or someone who's a lifestyle that you don't want to, that you reminded yourself, not only do I have my own stuff to deal with, but I don't see well anyway. So this is what Jesus is getting after. And once you start to adopt and adapt and live into the rhythms of the Sermon on the Mount, you will see that Jesus is correct when he says that he is Lord of life. And it's not coincidental that Jesus teaches all of this from on top of a mountain. When you read that, the people he was talking to would have immediately thought of Moses coming down from Mount Sinai. But what is it that you already know about mountains? Mountains are immovable. That mountain's not going anyplace. Do you remember over and over again in the Old Testament, what were good kings supposed to do? They were supposed to tear down the idolatrous places from where? From on the mountains. Because that's from where God's help descends. I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my hope come from? And constantly God is just reminding us that when you are low, you don't have to lift yourself up. That's where the Lord dwells. And so as we're reading through this, as you're working through it, just remind yourself that this is how Jesus determines, how Jesus guides us to become the people that we've always said we wanted to be.